A story about fear.
Fear being utilized in the news.
Fears and phobias.
A fear of fear.
Make that fear extinct within the person.
We're not trying to pretend that we're not afraid.
Let's talk about fear as an actual emotion.
Be afraid and then do it anyway. Hello and welcome to Truth Be Told. This month we are talking about emotions, and this week we are talking about fear. Everyone take a deep breath. In this conversation of emotions, we know that some of these emotions are maybe not the most comfortable to feel, and I think fear is one of those emotions. But tonight we're going to talk about maybe a different take on fear and how we can use fear as information, just like all the emotions that we experience, as information that we take in. We learn more about ourselves, we learn more about others, and we learn more about how when we allow these emotions to flow through and when we look at them, then we can really create experiences that speak to our best life. So sit back and relax and enjoy Truth Be Told. This week we're talking about fear. So let me tell you a story about fear in my own life. And I have to say, when I went in the card catalog of my brain to find a story about fear, it was quite a full drawer. But this story popped in my brain as this example of how sometimes we can move with fear, not resisting fear, not trying to pretend that we're not afraid, but to be afraid and then do it anyway. So some friends and I had decided we were going to go to Mexico and we were going to go cliff diving. Now I probably should say it was more like cliff leaping or cliff cannonballing. So saying cliff diving makes it a little bit more graceful than actually the experience was. And so there I stood in this cave. On the top of this cliff was about 40 feet high over the water. Now, I should also mention that I am afraid of enclosed spaces, which this was, and I'm also afraid of heights, which obviously this was. So this is like the double-decker of fear experience for me. And so but I didn't want to miss out. And how often have I done that, not stepped out in ways that I really wanted to, or in ways that I wanted to experience just because I was afraid. So I decided, no, I'm not going to let fear hold me down. And so there I stood on the cliff for what seemed like a lifetime, looking out into the abyss of this kind of dark cave, cavernous sort of water, not really knowing how deep it was or what was even underneath it. And so I stood there, and it felt like fear was kind of this wall in front of me that I would lean over to jump and bump against it. Nope, stay here. Lean over to jump, bump against it. Nope, stay here. And so I began to just take a deep breath, because I knew that I wanted to experience this, and I saw everyone else kind of experiencing it on both sides of me. So the fear wasn't in this idea of like, this is not safe, but it was fear of like stepping out into an unknown, stepping out into an experience that I had never done before, not knowing what would happen on the other side. But I finally decided, instead of resisting this idea that I was afraid or pretending I wasn't afraid or trying to be like something I wasn't, just to lean into the fear. Like, I'm afraid, this seems crazy, but I want to experience it. And when I did that, I felt a little bit of a relaxing. And in that moment, I stepped and dove, rolled over, cannonball, whatever you want to call it, into this water. And it was amazing. It was really cold, but it was amazing. And I was so glad that I did that. And so fear sometimes we're taught that fear is something to be avoided, but instead, what if fear is something to be leaned into? What if fear is something to look at, to question, to get curious about? Whether the fear is coming up because we're afraid to step out in ways that we want to, or dive off that cliff, or whether fear is showing up because this is an unsafe situation. Well, we can never know that until we lean in and ask the questions. And then sometimes we can step out, not against fear, but step out with it and understand that fear has a lot to teach us.
Good job jumping off. When you said, I don't know if it was necessarily because it was, wasn't safe because, you saw the people doing it. I'm like,
Right.
no, I think that's still there. That still sounds unsafe.
Yeah, but it felt like the fear was more than that. It was a fear of like, oh, the kind of the what ifs, and that's what kind of made me think about like often in my life, that's what's kept me back is the what ifs. And that doesn't mean obviously you don't make informed decisions, but just moving from this space of being really curious about the fear and where it's coming from and what it's holding, what it's holding you back or not, that's been my experience at least.
Yeah, I like that. I had a kind of a similar experience in college. I went bungee jumping from like a crane setup on my birthday. It was my birthday. And I remember being up there and just looking over, my ankles were tied in and just like not feeling it either. But it was so many people were down there, and they're all counting down out loud. And I didn't want to be the one person that didn't go when it got to 0. They started on 3. And so it wasn't much time to think about it. Yeah, I don't know. For me, it was the fear of, looking afraid that made me jump.
Right.
That overcame the fear of like something going terribly wrong and my head smashing, because I knew like that, then I wouldn't know the difference anyway. If I didn't jump, I would know and everybody else would know, and I had to do it.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I just think about how many times that I have not stepped out because of fear, and it's been not like a physical fear. Often there have been those times, but I think that what has kept me, that I look back, it's kept me kind of playing small sometimes, is this kind of fear, this kind of low hum of fear of like, well, if you can't like be the best at it, don't try it. Or what if you do this and it's whatever. All those things that come up, and then it keeps you kind of playing small. Even like tonight, y'all may know Dan is not here, and so I'm the behind the scenes, like running the little tech stuff. And so if something happens, that's why But then there's that I noticed in me even before we started, like this fear of like not being good enough and not being the best and not being. And then it was this, and I had to recognize, there's that fear that keeps us playing small or not taking risk or not saying, hey, you know what, I'm going to do the best I can. And, I'm going to show up authentically and do my best. And I just have been recognizing where that fear comes up, and then how it can be paralyzing sometimes.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's a wonderful point, because for me, like, fear of like roller coasters or whitewater rafting, like those things, I'm able just to push myself right in. But it's fear. Like, it might look strange if I step out there, if I, make a video of myself saying something. Am I going to look weird to my friends if I, like, that's the fear that, like really gets to me. And at some point, learning that same thing, like, you know what? If it's something that I feel strongly about, then I just got to let go and see who cares. And I have to give you props for your end of the tech is going swimmingly. The one thing that was my end was the one part that we didn't get that we'll fix in the future, but I don't want you to take the heat on that because your tech's working great.
Let's see what else we have to say about fear.
Yeah.
In other news, fear. I think we have all become accustomed to fear being utilized in the news. In fact, if this were a real news station, I'd say something like, news media actively weaponizing fear to fracture U.S. something, buzzwords, just to get you all worked up. Whether it is used for entertainment value to boost viewership or used as political propaganda, a combination of both, or really whatever other way you want to think of it, you will find fear is very often a major factor behind most news imagery, stories, headlines, and videos. While fear seems to have become a necessary ingredient to this style of interpretation of the world around us, we don't often hear about the way fear shows up in these situations. We've developed a fear of fear, but we don't hear about fear itself. We do often hear fear as a mechanism being used, but rarely, if ever, a real discussion on fear. So let's put down the mechanism of fear as motivation or as a tool of division. Let's talk about fear as an actual emotion. Not the fear of fear that has become so common, but the emotion, the feeling of fear, and how it affects us. In order to do this, there is a lot of unlearning to be done. As a society, we have bought into a lot of unhealthy beliefs, primarily in this case that emotions are bad, and to show them is weakness, and weakness is death. Just squash down those emotions and keep pretending like we don't have any. Well, just like Star Wars has taught us, that only leads to the dark side. Fear leads to anger, which leads to hate, which leads to the dark side. I mean, suffering, or maybe just a belief in the division that creates a perception of the dark side. Either way, it leads to suffering for ourselves and those around us. One of our greatest fears, perhaps, is failure. Maybe spending decades attempting success only to realize that was never going to bring us happiness. As if getting to the other side is somehow the definition of success and not the building of the bridge for others to use. Yet, this is somehow the belief that getting to the other side should feel like success. And when or if it doesn't, have we failed? At which point we have a choice. Turn it around and allow this experience to help others, in which case we recognize the true value of our experience, or we have the option to ignore the discomfort and insist that everyone else should also endure the same struggle, because to admit otherwise would require us to admit our own feelings of failure and a sense of less than that comes along with committing to an unnecessary struggle for so long. In many ways, it is this commitment, buying into the fear of fear, which temporarily relieves us of our fear of discomfort, that somehow feeling discomfort equates to weakness, and, well, weakness is death. And like the dark side, ignoring, bypassing our fear, leaves us casting fear and shame onto others. When woke has turned into a slur to fight empathy and human decency, instead of being recognized as the emotional evolution of society, we might be buying into the fear of fear. We might be practicing bypass. I guess we always have the choice to call it all fine when it is not and see what happens, or we can choose to embrace fear itself and face our own discomfort. You know, real fears like clicking on the Make a Reservation button on your favorite restaurant's website and accidentally ending up on a FaceTime call with them. Yikes. This has been In Other News. Thanks for watching.
All of that. That fear of fear. I feel that, and it just creates this kind of cyclical thing that we're afraid to be afraid, and then we're afraid to like feel afraid, and then it just starts this like stuffing down of things. I think you talked about last week, like that stuffing down of emotions, but I think like stuffing down fear. I don't know. I think that it goes somewhere, doesn't it? It goes.
Yeah.
and I think we don't want to appear this or that, so we just kind of stuff that down, and it comes out and not being authentic, or comes out in like this kind of paralyzing feeling when we're not able to kind of like look at fear.
Yeah, I like that. There was, so much there, at the beginning of what Dan was talking about there, and with the image of the person that built the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and it made me think about, I've seen people that by society's standards look successful, in the business that they created, and then they've got 200 employees, and then they come out and they say, I built this all by myself. It's like, well, wait a minute, you just told us you had 200 employees. You're like, maybe they had a little hand in that too.
Right.
And and what is that? I think that's that fear of the fear there, that there's just some sort of compensation going on to make people feel, I don't know, invincible or more powerful, like missing out on the opportunity of the collaboration and help. And I don't know.
Yeah. And I think, especially too, I think in spiritual communities, I think sometimes people we feel like we can't be afraid. Like being afraid is somehow that we have failed spiritually, or not spiritual enough, or not doing it right. But I think fear is this emotion, this thing that comes up within us. It's kind of that. For me, fear feels like this transition emotion. It's like that thing that I feel from where I am and where I'm getting ready to go. And so then fear kind of likes to hide in the crack of that. And so I think that it's okay. I mean, I think it's natural to be fearful. I think it's natural to have this emotion. And I think that to allow ourselves to feel that fear, then we can kind of allow it to kind of come to the surface and ask it questions, and then be able to move through it. And then on the other side, now that sounds easy, obviously, saying it like that. But for me, that's what I've been trying to look at, ask questions, make friends with fear, not avoid it, but like welcome it in and say, hey, I see you. I'm not sure what you're about, but let's sit down and talk about it and get to what's the underlying thing. Because it's often not the thing. It's often the 14 things that are underneath.
Right. I love that. Because when you're leaning into it like that, you can kind of ask that, like, okay, I'm willing to look at it. So what is it that I'm afraid of? Like, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah.
And then you can start to play that scenario. Like, okay, so like maybe this would happen. Okay, so if that happened, then what would I do? Oh, well, if that actually happened, I guess I would probably have to do X and Y.
Right.
Okay, I guess that's not necessarily that bad.
Right.
What's the other worst thing? And so then, you can start to like process, how will I deal with it? What will happen? But if you're unwilling to like even look at that fear, then you're just kind of like, I don't know if I'm going to start that yet.
Yeah.
You're like, and don't even know why it is that you're like kind of either procrastinating or ignoring that call within you.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, is like, I think we talked about it last week too, is that fear and emotions in general are information sources. There are a reaction to our environment. There are a reaction to, people, places, things, situations. And it's to use it as information. I think that when we can see them as information, then we're more easily able to feel them and feel our way through them, instead of being kind of sucked down by them. I don't know. I've had many times of being sucked into emotion and then swirled around and like thrown out the other side, it felt like. But I think that, and really looking at them as information signals, I think you said that last week, and that was really, for me, that stuck in my brain about that.
Right. Yeah. Just that idea of giving some sort of information.
Yeah.
That we should value all of it.
Easier said than done, but true. We're working our way.
Yeah, so but once you know, like you can't, you don't know what you don't know, and then when you do know, then you're one step closer. Like knowing is a big part of the battle, not all of the battle, that's for sure. But The big part. You can't have the
Yeah.
battle unless you know.
You're right. Let's see what's next. We would like to take a quick break from the program to let you know a little bit about SEC. We are an intentional spiritual community with a vision of personal transformation and communal evolution, an authentic way of being, living, and viewing the world. Everything you could ever possibly want to know and more can be found on our website at soulevolutioncollaborative.org. So come along for the adventure. Tuesday we have Truth Be Told at 7 p.m. Eastern, which is what you're enjoying now. Thursday we have our small group, The Gathering, at 7 p.m. Eastern. And so this is a group experience where we take an even closer look at the topic for the week, how it shows up in our own personal lives, and the healing and transformative power of belonging and connection. On Sundays, we have Strip Down Sunday at 12:30 Eastern, where we offer a streamlined approach to your Sunday morning experience through a short and sweet talk on the weekly theme. And coming soon, our SEC Second Sunday Experience, a Sunday evening experience that will demonstrate a new way of doing community. Be on the lookout for these events and so much more. If you can't already tell, we have a blast here at SEC. It's so much fun to explore these topics with you each and every week. And it's our desire to not only share what we've learned, but to journey alongside each of you as we navigate this adventure we call life. Our vision is to bring these teachings to everyday life in new and powerful ways. If you would like to support the vision of SEC and its continued evolution, we invite you to go to soulevolutioncollaborative.org and click on the donate button. All donations are tax deductible and serve to support this evolving ministry and its vision of personal transformation and communal evolution. And now, back to the show.
I bet you didn't know that when dealing with fears and phobias, there's a thing called exposure therapy, where you take the person that has the fear and you place them in that situation that is the fear, and that helps to kind of desensitize them towards the experience, and through time and repetition, you can virtually make that fear extinct within the person. Okay, I'm guessing you probably did know that, but now here's the part that I didn't know, and I'm guessing that maybe you didn't know. It is that through technology, we are now doing exposure therapy through the use of virtual reality. It's pretty cool. So it's very logical to see how virtual reality could help somebody overcome their fear of heights or fear of flying. In the past, when you wanted to do exposure therapy, it's kind of impractical, because one, you've got to get the therapist and the clients up onto a plane, to use the one for flying. And then you can't control for variables like turbulence. Something like that could quickly derail an exposure experience into a traumatic experience, and that's not good. So look at the possibilities with virtual reality. We can control the exposure situations, control if and when turbulence rises, or other things. So this all makes sense. I can see how this is a very powerful tool. They couple it with biofeedback, which I'll get to that in just a second. So I started asking myself when I stumbled onto this through my research for this segment, and saw that I was like, well, how does it apply to other things, like maybe mental fears? And one that I was curious about was the fear of public speaking. So here's a quick side note. One of my favorite quotes from Jerry Seinfeld was talking about a recent study that he had seen, and it said for the average person, the number one fear is the fear of having to give a speech in public. And he thought that was interesting, because on that same list, death was number 3. So his assessment was, so if you're at a funeral, the average person would rather be the one in the casket than the one delivering the eulogy. Pretty interesting. Okay, back to the point. Virtual reality has been used to help people overcome their fear of public speaking. And now that led me to go a little further, like how can we use it to overcome what we talk about in Soul Evolution Collaborative? We talk about how our fears and our culturizing, the ways that we are brought up to kind of play small and play it safe, becomes essentially a fear of trying new things or branching out. I wasn't able to find any virtual reality research on that, but I'm guessing in time I can imagine how that could become a real thing. So how it worked with the fear of speaking is that they set up situations virtually that the person in the setup sees, and it gets to experience different things that might come up, and how do you deal with it. But where it gets really cool is they couple that with biofeedback machines to monitor like heart rate and their breath and blood pressure, these kind of things. And as they incorporate practices like mindful breathing and other ways of calming down your nerves, they claim to have about a 90% effective rate for curing people of their fear of giving a speech in public. So I think the possibilities are endless. The more that we lean into technology, the world really is turning into an amazing place. It always has been, but I think the possibilities for our future in the way of harnessing technology really offers some promising things. So that's what we got for you this week on Bet You Didn't Know.
Good stuff. You just had to use the example of flying, didn't you? Knowing how terrified I am to fly.
Well, some virtual reality exposure therapy.
Maybe. Well, it's getting ready to, before we came on, I'm booking tickets to fly. Lord, I can't even say it. Makes me so nervous. And so like in a couple of weeks, we're going to fly. And so like, man, that kicks my fear into like overdrive. But, we were talking about this topic of fear, and in my brain, I was like, okay, just allow yourself to feel it. It's kind of like that, when you try not to be anxious, you're just more anxious, or you try not to be fearful and you're just more fearful, because that's kind of what kind of ruminates. And so just kind of allowing myself to be fearful and to kind of go through that process. But man, fear is an uncomfortable emotion, isn't it?
Yeah, it's definitely not fun for sure. Yeah. Again, like I don't know what it is that the fear of like flying and that stuff, for some reason that's never bugged me.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel for people, sounds debilitating to not, for you to not want to fly when you have to.
Right.
How do you manage that? Like I don't know. I think for me, part of it's always been that I've always felt like I wasn't supposed to be here, and I've always had this desire, like, if it's my time to check out,
right,
I'm not gonna, then I'm okay with that. But of course, that's changed as I've gotten older and started to learn how to really value this experience. But I still.
Well, I think that, even though it's kind of a fear of something physical, I think it does speak to this, this underlying fear that happens when it's the unknown, or the fear of not having control. And I mean, that's kind of like the immediate thing in this sort of flying fear. But man, can we just like spread that out to like a lot of fears? And I wonder, like, if we really ask the question, like when we felt fearful, when we felt this emotion of fear, separated from, the experience of trauma, danger, violence, that sort of fear, separating that and just speaking about this emotion of fear that comes when, we feel like we're not going to be good enough, or we're not sure that what our next step is, and or we're not sure if we step out in this way, this may happen, or we don't. That sort of fear. I think that's something that we can all, regardless of our life experiences, can have in common. Is that feeling of fear, and it even though it's kind of this mental thing, we can feel it in our bodies, and I guess we all express it differently. For me, I feel it like someone sitting on my chest, and it's like this like kind of like rush of like warmth, and so I wonder, if we allowed ourselves to experience that, and be okay with that, and be able to kind of sit in that discomfort for just a few minutes longer than we think we can, and really allow that fear to come and to ask the questions. And I think that we would find the answers would be very eye-opening, in any given circumstance, I think.
Mm-hmm. You know, that just kind of helped me identify like where I think my deeper fears lie. Like that fear of confrontation for me is a
Yeah.
big one, or fear of, like voicing like my opinion when I know that it's maybe not the popular one, or, expressing like, displeasure or discomfort with like a loved one. I have a harder time with that. And then
Yeah.
also like maybe even like, speaking up when, in public. I know there was one time, like one thing that like has impressed me about my wife is, we were driving one time in downtown Denver, and there was a heated kind of like domestic argument going on between a couple, and out of nowhere, like she just like shut it down. And I was like, wow, one, impressed, and two, also a little afraid, like she's shutting it down. Am I going to be the one that's going to end up in the fist fight with this, with this
Right.
dude?
Right.
And then, but I didn't have that in me back then. But then as life went on and that impressed me, I kind of like shocked myself a few years ago, just a couple years ago in Orlando. And I saw something happening on the way out of work one night, and it was, like a little after midnight downtown Orlando, and something like I just spoke up and, yelled to stop the situation. And afterwards, like I was like kind of like in adrenaline and shaking. So I don't know how like seeing other people demonstrate bravery or standing up, in the situation when somebody needs it, somehow subconsciously it like bled into me and inspired me. But I
Yeah.
still, those are my weak spots, or fear spots,
Right.
areas for.
And those are challenging situations too. I think that, I think sometimes it's okay to have fear and to move anyway. It's okay. It's kind of those things like if I wait till I'm not afraid to do something, I will never do it, that sort of thing. And so I know, flying's kind of a silly example, but like, to fly and be afraid and that be okay. And then when I get on the other side, well, I'll have a great time, And so it's kind of, for me, that it's kind of in that like kind of a model for life too. Like sometimes there are times when we're afraid, and that's okay. And that we can move, and that fear can still be there. And then we can still have these beautiful experiences. And I think the more that we are able to kind of befriend fear in this way, the more that we will realize that it doesn't have the power we think it does. And I think that comes with the repetition, that comes with practice, that comes with, just experience in doing that. But that it is okay. It's not something that we have to go out of our way to avoid. Because if that's the case, then we will never do anything. But just allow it to be what it is, an information signal, to maybe look at that area in a different way. And we learn a lot about ourselves and others in the process, I think.
Yeah. And there's definitely a gift too of, like knowing like if I can get through this, get over this fear now, like, if it's a big fear, then I'll feel like I can do anything afterwards.
Yeah, it does open the door, doesn't it?
Yeah, there's a definite gift in that.
Good stuff.
Indeed.
All right, friend.
Thank you.
All right, see y'all next week.